We have been brought closer because of the circumstances as well. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You are, uniquely bonded because of what we've been through.
A massive royal family scandal just erupted inside Windsor Castle. Experts have waited 25 years for this exact moment. Prince William finally snapped. He marched straight down to the dusty storage room where Queen Camilla buried Diana's official portrait. He dragged it out and hung it exactly where it belongs, right next to Queen Elizabeth on the Hall of Matriarchs wall. When Camilla spotted the painting, she completely lost her mind. Palace staff members say they had never seen her so furious. She stormed straight into King Charles and demanded he rip it off the wall right then. What Charles did next turned the entire royal palace upside down, and nobody inside those gates saw it coming, the wound that just never healed. There is a hidden painting of Princess Diana that most of the public has never seen. When you find out where that artwork has been rotting for the last 25 years, it will absolutely break your heart. The painter finished it during one of the most incredible eras of Diana's life. She was at the absolute peak of her fame, her stunning beauty, her pure warmth and her innocence. When the creator finally stepped back and said it was done, Diana slowly walked over to it. According to witnesses in the room, she just stood there. She stared at the canvas and said absolutely nothing for a long time. Then her eyes welled up with heavy tears. But she refused to let them fall. She blinked them away, turned to the artist, grabbed both of their hands in hers and gently kissed them. She was just a woman so deeply moved by the portrait that she had no idea what else to do with all that emotion. That masterpiece was supposed to hang in the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor Castle, a space entirely reserved for the most important women in all of British royal history. Princess Diana had truly earned her spot on that wall, but she never made it. She tragically died before it could happen. And the very second Camilla gained the power to fix it, she did the exact opposite. She snatched that painting herself. She carried the heavy frame down the long corridor with her own 2 hands and shoved it into a dark, filthy storage closet where the public would never see it again. When a palace worker stepped up and politely offered to carry it, Camilla whipped around and humiliated them so terribly, right in front of the crew. They quietly backed away and never spoke up again. She wanted this cruel victory entirely for herself, and as she walked out of that dusty room and slammed the heavy door shut behind her, the shocked staff members, standing right there, said she was actually grinning. Not nervously, she smiled like she had just won a massive prize. She had waited a very long time to finally collect. But well before Camilla ever got inside Diana's royal home to take down her picture, she had been doing something vicious. She had been ruthlessly mocking the princess. Every single morning at her private estate in Wiltshire, Camilla would sit down with a hot cup of tea and the daily papers. Throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, the British tabloids were ripping Princess Diana apart on an almost daily basis, and they had plenty of dark material to use. Because behind closed palace doors, Diana was fighting brutal mental battles that absolutely nobody around her wanted to help her survive. Her royal marriage to Charles was completely rotting from the inside out. He was barely even there. He acted totally freezing in private and just ignored her in public. The stress caused Diana to develop bulimia, a terrible eating disorder quietly destroying her physical health. All while the Crown expected her to smile, wave, and perform perfectly at every single public event. She was throwing up multiple times a day. Her weight was dropping fast, and everyone could see it. She struggled with crushing depression so heavy that some days she could barely get out of bed. On top of that nightmare she was raising, 2 little boys almost entirely alone. She was trapped inside an institution that did not care about her mental health at all. She tried to beg palace insiders to understand what she was actually surviving. She pleaded for a doctor. Instead, they just told her to quickly pull herself together. The heavy trauma kept building up with zero escape routes. Sometimes the raw pressure leaked out in public. A shaky tremble in her voice during a speech. Hot tears she just could not stop at the worst possible moments. A tragic fragility. That flashing cameras caught and hungry tabloids weaponized instantly. The press called her hysterical. They called her mentally unstable. They printed endless lies saying she was way too fragile, overly emotional, and completely unfit for royal duties. And, on mornings when the papers printed something incredibly vicious, ugly attacks about her shrinking body, her breaking mind, or her tragic crying, fits at a public gala. Camilla would pick up the morning paper, read the cruelest insults out loud at the breakfast table, and sip her tea. And those people would just laugh. Her elite circle of friends from old aristocratic families, who had always viewed Princess Diana as common and totally out of her league, would laugh right along with the cruelty. Camilla was, loving every single word of it. Inside that exact same circle, Diana had nicknames. Some called her the Mouse, others went with Bambi, just a wobbly girl with zero backbone. But the most vicious insult of all, the one that got tossed around most often, the one that finally made its way straight back to Princess Diana herself, was the clothes horse, which is literally just a silent prop to drape fabric over, and Camilla never once told anyone in her inner circle to stop using those cruel nicknames. She never corrected a single soul. Then there was the whole height issue. Diana stood exactly 5 feet and 10 inches tall. Whenever she wore heels, which she pretty much always did for royal duties, she was clearly taller than Charles in every single paparazzi photo, so she started doing this trick. Before any camera clicked, she would bend her knees. Just a little bit. She would dip one hip down. She literally shrank her own physical presence in public just so the future king beside her would not look small, all to avoid being blamed for his bruised ego. The British tabloids completely ripped her apart. For it, anyway. Gossip columnists openly mocked her royal stoop. One brutal article painted her as a woman who had absolutely no clue what to do with. Her own physical frame like some awkward young animal failing to control its own legs. Meanwhile, Camilla, who got to stand perfectly naturally, next to Charles without shrinking an inch, apparently found this specific royal struggle to be quietly hilarious. Reading the tabloids over hot tea, Camilla was highly amused. Now there is one scandalous story that remains totally unconfirmed, and never firmly denied either. At a very posh dinner party, a guest actually dropped the nickname Clothes Horse out loud, while Diana stood close enough to catch every word. The entire room froze. Diana just smiled. She kept her facial expression completely, composed, gracefully gliding through the party, just like nothing had happened. After all, she had spent years mastering exactly how to absorb a nasty blow in public without even blinking. But one loyal staff member who worked that exact same evening later spilled the truth to a close. Friend about what really happened once Diana retreated to her private quarters later that night. She walked straight in. She sat dead center on the edge of her mattress and just froze for a very long time. Her worried staff stood, quietly in the corner watching. They later confessed that eerie silence was actually way harder to witness than a sobbing breakdown would be, because crying meant she was letting the pain out. That dark stillness proved Diana was just burying the royal betrayal deep inside. Herself the exact same way she buried her feelings for years. Now, this is where the story gets really twisted. Diana tragically died in Paris in August 1997, within hours of the fatal crash being officially confirmed well before most of the British public even realised their beloved princess was gone. The private phones inside Buckingham Palace were already ringing off the hook, and the Frantic calls made in those initial hours were obsessed with jewellery. Specifically, they wanted to know which crown jewels had travelled to Paris with the late Diana, which priceless items needed dragging back to the royal vault immediately. A senior aide was dispatched. A guy boarded a flight to Paris while Diana lay lifeless inside a cold French hospital room. His sole job was raiding her personal belongings to make absolutely sure the right diamonds were secured before the press could ask any awkward questions. That was literally the very first official royal move executed inside the palace the moment Princess Diana died. Meanwhile, as that shady mission happened, Camilla was already prowling the palace halls. She spent decades playing the hidden mistress Charles snuck around to visit while he was still publicly married to Diana. But now the princess was gone forever. When Camilla finally claimed the exact suite Diana had occupied, she did not just unpack her bags and settle in quietly. She immediately started erasing Diana from the palace walls and the rooms, and every single corner that once held her bright presence. Diana always loved keeping fresh flowers, blooming inside her private palace rooms. The second Camilla moved her stuff in, she ordered them all burned. A poor staffer had to physically haul Diana's beautiful floral arrangements out of those suites. Someone actually had to execute that petty demand right through to the end. Every single petal was tossed in the fire. The very bedroom where Diana slept, the room where she pulled her grieving boys into bed. On miserable mornings and wept totally alone at night, Camilla had that sacred room locked up permanently. She obviously did not want to sleep in that bed herself, but she made dead sure nobody else would ever sleep there again either. She wanted the space sealed like a dirty secret, totally shut away and forgotten. All of Diana's personal belongings got boxed, up and hauled away. Every single photograph was yanked down from ceremonial walls across the royal residences, and that famous Hall of Matriarchs over at Windsor, that highly sacred wall, the exact wall waiting patiently for Diana's regal portrait. Never actually got it, because even with Princess Diana dead, Camilla somehow found her, lingering ghost, deeply threatening. Prince William was just 15 years old, walking behind his mother's heavy coffin through the grim streets of London. He already knew the dark truth. Diana had personally sat him down to explain the betrayal. She confessed there were 3 people crowding their marriage. He silently watched Camilla take over his mother's rooms. He watched his mother's portraits get stripped from the walls. He kept his face completely blank whenever anyone was looking his way, watching. But sheer fury was burning him alive from the inside out. At 16, he finally broke. He pulled a close friend aside and spilled every single secret he had been holding back. He said Camilla dug her claws into his father and refused to let go for even a second. He claimed that was exactly why his mother died. Because Princess Diana had been forced out of the royal family, stripped of every single layer of protection she possessed, shoved further and further toward the absolute edges until no one was left beside her, and she ended up totally isolated and totally unprotected in a dark Paris tunnel in the dead of the night. We have tragic reports out of Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a horrific car crash. A 16-year-old boy whispered those words, and then he locked them right back up inside himself, and he carried that heavy burden for the next 25 years. But Prince William was not the only royal family member carrying deep scars tied to Camilla. There was someone else involved, Princess Anne. Her bitter feud went back far longer than Diana's. Her dark history with Camilla stretched back 50 years long before that painting was ever dragged into cold storage. And on the night William finally made his move, Anne stood right beside him. Diana's portrait returns where it truly belongs, The night before the royal scandal broke, William sat alone in his private study and made a single phone call. He dialed. Princess Anne. When she answered the line, he did not waste a second. He simply said, "She comes home tomorrow." Anne did not hesitate for even a single second. She replied, "I simply cannot wait to see the absolute shock on her face. This is long overdue. Diana absolutely deserves to come home." The phone call ended right there. Neither royal needed another single word. And across London that exact same night, Camilla crawled into bed with zero clue that secret conversation had just taken place. What Camilla failed to realise, what almost nobody outside a very tiny and carefully hand-picked inner circle actually knew, was that Prince William had not simply woken up one random morning and decided to pull this off. He sat in private meetings with palace curators discussing strict royal portrait placement rules. He had dug through the historical archives of every single portrait placement that ever took place inside the royal palaces. Going back for decades, he made absolutely sure every single protocol was followed to the exact letter. He needed this mission done so, flawlessly and so cleanly that nobody on earth, not Camilla, not her expensive lawyers, not any senior palace official could ever reverse it afterward. The morning the drama unfolded, William's loyal team arranged for Queen Camilla to attend a distant public engagement outside of London. The sole purpose was getting her out of the building and keeping her far away until Diana's painting was secured on the wall and completely beyond anyone's physical reach. Camilla left that morning without the slightest bit of suspicion. The Hall of Matriarchs was tightly sealed off. Only a tiny handful of personally vetted staff members were allowed inside. Absolutely nothing was placed on the official royal diary that day. Zero press releases existed anywhere. This was happening in absolute total dead silence. In the early evening, the stunning portrait of Princess Diana was carried straight into the Hall of Matriarchs. It had been tightly wrapped up and gathering dust in that cold storage room where Camilla had banished it for over 20 years. The palace staff who carried it moved, so carefully and so slowly. They walked the exact way people move when they carry something fragile that has been hurt and that desperately deserves to finally be treated with real gentleness. Princess Anne was already waiting inside the room when they arrived. She had insisted on being there in person. She had waited far too many years to let any other person stand in her place for this massive moment. The staff member assigned to carefully remove the thick protective wrapping paused right before she cut the first tie. She stood there for a long moment with her hands resting on the outer cloth. Then she slowly pulled back the linen. Then she carefully lifted away the delicate tissue paper. And suddenly, Princess Diana was back, her iconic face looking exactly as it was painted at the absolute golden height of her life. One of the loyal staff members in the room that historic evening later revealed that when Diana's face finally came back into the light, something heavy shifted in the room. Nobody made a single sound, but the air in that gallery instantly changed the exact second Diana appeared. And Princess Anne, who had been standing just a few feet back, silently watching every single step of the process, stepped forward. She stood directly in front of the portrait and stared at it for a very long time without saying a single word. And then she slowly reached out, placing one hand on the edge of the golden frame and straightened it just very slightly, exactly the way you fix something that has been sitting wrong for far, far too long. Within 90 minutes of the famous painting arriving in that gallery, Diana's face was proudly on the wall. She was, hung directly beside the late Queen Elizabeth. Two powerful women side by side on the most deeply honoured wall in the entire royal residence. A queen who ruled for 70 long years alongside the princess who never got her chance to reign. Everyone just stood there staring at, it. Right then, Princess Anne murmured something very quietly, almost just to herself, but a nearby palace staff member heard every single word. She whispered, "Diana belongs right here. She always did. Look, you really need to understand exactly who Princess Anne is in this entire royal scandal, because the way she stood inside that room, the way her hand rested perfectly on that picture frame, none of this happened by accident. Anne wasn't just showing support for Prince William that particular evening. She had her own personal motive to be standing there. She carried her own deep wound stretching back 50 years, way before Camilla ever married Andrew Parker Bowles. He was actually in a very serious relationship with Princess Anne. The two got close enough to openly talk about getting married. But the British royal family shut that idea down completely. Princess Anne had absolutely zero say in the matter. She stepped aside because there was literally no other option on the table for her. And, incredibly soon after, Anne was pushed away, Camilla swooped right in. Andrew proposed to Camilla, and in 1973 Princess Anne wore her formal royal attire and sat quietly in those church pews watching the entire wedding ceremony play out right in front of her. She couldn't just stay home. A senior working royal cannot skip a high society wedding without sparking a massive tabloid scandal of its own. So she went to the church, and she watched Camilla march down the aisle toward the very man Anne truly believed she had a future with. Now Anne was never a woman to break down crying in front of a crowd. From childhood, she was trained to keep her expression completely frozen. In public, absolutely no, matter how much emotional pain was tearing her apart inside. So she sat trapped in those pews with a blank stare, and she watched every painful second of that wedding ceremony. Close friends who knew Anne well during that era say she had a very specific way of processing grief. She didn't let it crush her. She completely transformed it. She packed all that raw emotion deep down into something icy rigid and permanently unforgiving. And she carried that weight forever. Then the same woman who strolled down that wedding aisle spent the next few decades as the infamous royal mistress who destroyed her brother's marriage, mercilessly ground Princess Diana down until nothing remained, and then finally marched right into Buckingham Palace, proudly wearing a queen's crown. Prominent royal biographer Penny Junor noted that Camilla was actually deeply intimidated by Princess Anne for years. Anne's freezing hostility toward her felt incredibly unsettling, proving the bitter history sitting between these two women was never resolved and never will be. Right after the 2023 coronation, palace insiders say Anne marched up to Camilla at a highly private dinner, looked her dead in the eye and snapped, "You are not the queen, you are simply the king's wife." So when Anne stood proudly in the Hall of Matriarchs that fateful night, resting her hand on Diana's portrait, she was there because this revenge belonged to her exactly as much as it belonged to Prince William. Later that evening, Camilla arrived back from a London engagement. She had absolutely no clue about the palace drama unfolding inside Windsor Castle while she was away. She washed up for bed. She fell asleep. Meanwhile, down in the Hall of Matriarchs inside the historic royal residence she thought she had completely conquered, Diana stared right out from the wall, right beside the late queen. When morning came, Camilla was about to wake up and walk directly into the most miserable royal day she had faced in 30 long years. She just didn't realize it yet. It was Camilla's ultimate nightmare and a whole new palace hierarchy. That following morning she strolled into that grand hallway just like she walked down every other corridor inside Windsor, completely relaxed, totally unhurried. Then she glanced up, and there was Princess Diana mounted on the wall, filling the exact spot left empty for 25 years. Camilla froze. her body locked up completely mid-stride, almost as if someone had just severed the vital signal linking her, panicked brain and her legs. Royal insiders closely connected to the palace claim she stood glued before that portrait for nearly a full 60 seconds, without making a single peep, and then a bizarre noise finally escaped her throat. Palace staff members lingering nearby in that very corridor later secretly described it as a frantic gasp they had never once heard from the Queen Consort in all their years working inside that historic building. It literally sounded like a car tire squealing to a terrifying stop. After that, she started frantically dialing numbers. She demanded Diana's royal portrait be ripped off that wall immediately, but the cold response she got back was no. She furiously demanded an emergency sit-down meeting with Prince William completely face-to-face. The chilling answer that came back again was no. So she ran to King Charles. She burst straight into his room and stood towering over him, demanding he fix this massive scandal. She ordered him to make a phone call. She demanded he do the exact same thing he had faithfully done for her 100 times over 30 years, which was stand firmly between her and whatever storm was coming. She waited for him to be the fiercely protective man he had always been for her, without fail. Charles just looked at her, entirely silent. She demanded a completely full explanation from every single member of the royal staff who helped with the dramatic portrait restoration. The defiant answer that echoed back was just no. Every angry demand, every phone call, everywhere she frantically turned no, no, no. For the very first time in her, for her entire time as a member of this famous royal family, Camilla held absolutely zero real power inside her own palace home. And in that crushing silence, Camilla finally accepted the bitter truth she had avoided facing for 30 long years. She was never his true first choice. She was simply the convenient royal compromise, and the man sitting directly across from her had just for the very first time in his life picked his son over her. He chose Princess Diana's lasting memory over her. He chose the very institution he spent 30 years destroying for her sake over the actual woman he broke it for. Right then, Princess Anne strode into the room. Anne stared at Camilla with absolute freezing stillness. It was the terrifying calm of someone who had waited 50 years for this exact moment and felt zero need to rush a single precious second of it. Then she firmly spoke 5 unforgettable words. It is exactly what Diana deserved. She didn't even pause for Camilla to respond. She just spun around and marched straight out of the room, and Queen Camilla stood frozen there in the chilling silence Anne left behind her totally alone. Princess Diana's portrait proudly hangs on that wall today, right beside Queen Elizabeth. The 2 iconic women who gave the modern British monarchy its true emotional heart, finally resting side by side in the place they always belonged. And there is absolutely nothing Camilla can ever do about it. Nothing Charles can say. Nothing any palace aide or royal official or clever lawyer can file or legally challenge. Prince William made perfectly sure of that 20 years ago when he started quietly learning every single obscure royal rule specifically so this moment could never be undone.